Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I can see that my stream is now active. I'm so sorry it took me a while to say anything. I have noticed that on the last few streams, my first few words and my last few words are somehow cut off. I don't know why. And as you can see from the thumbnail, this is basically me announcing my return. And to anybody who has actually been sort of active on this channel recently, and I've gained like 10 subscribers for some reason in the last month, primarily through my Samsung reaction video, but also because I have been back. I have actually made a video similar to this like a week ago, but I canceled the stream because of a combination of some technical problems and because I wasn't happy with the content itself. And then and then I actually made a successful reaction video to the latest PlayStation showcase, but because in between some breaks after the showcase was over, I played an Apple ad, and that is apparently more licensed content than the PlayStation showcase, which has like music and stuff like that. But apparently Apple doesn't like when their ads are being shared or like viewed for some reason, even though this is basically me just giving them an extra ad space. I know that my channel isn't significant enough, but you get the gist. So yeah, I've tried to be back basically, and now hopefully I am back, baby. This won't be too long of a stream because I just played an hour of Beat Saber on my PSVR 2 and I'm completely sweat soaked. I hope nothing drips onto my microphone. It's actually quite disgusting. Regardless, I think we are all looking forward to WWDC on June 5th. So it's basically less than 1.5 weeks until then. And I just before I wanted to prepare this video, I saw that 95Mac, as usual, thanks to 95Mac, Mac Rumors, The Verge, wherever I get my information, they compiled some of the things that we should expect from WWDC, and I'm actually very much looking forward to deconstructing a little bit of what they're saying. However, this will obviously not be my usual an hour to 2 hour long stream, because I want to be really back once WWDC takes place. My developer account is ready, so I can really test out all the betas. I will try to get maybe not my face directly, but some version of my Memoji face onto either streams or more likely VODs. So you can let me know which of that content. I will be doing a lot of exploring next month. So you can tell me which of the type of content you enjoy more, or at least not disenjoy the least, so to speak. So if I'm talking gibberish from time to time, that's Beat Saber's fault. Okay, so let's get right to it. This will be basically me going through 95Mac. However, this is not just me lazily reading out, at least unless I fall asleep. This is somewhat more involved than that, so please don't tune out right away. So basically they break down when is WWDC, what is WWDC, how to watch WWDC, why is WWDC, basically all the W questions. But the most interesting part for us, of course, is what to expect at WWDC. So the main announcement usually is the next new version of iOS. Previously, like long ago, we actually even had some things such as new iPhone announcements. And while we did have hardware over the years, including something like the 2019 Mac Pro, I would usually say that the hardware announcements at WWDC were usually overshadowed by the software announcements, but they went hand in hand. So I think the last decade, really, software was absolutely absolutely the main focus of each WWDC. However, which software gets like the most love from Apple and which changes get the most love from viewers obviously changes from year to year, simply because Apple's focus will be mainly iOS one year, then Mac OS, and then, oh, we haven't done a lot for tvOS, so let's not do it again. But iPadOS sort of comes and goes. Even when it was renamed to iPadOS, that was a big focus. So I'm not actually saying that like, ooh, iOS 17 is the absolute focus, because there's actually something, in my opinion, bigger this year. But let's start with the software before we get to the hardware. So what are the 9 to 5 Macs summarizing about iOS 17? Well, as per usual, there will be changes with like new apps and stuff. It's kind of like freeform last year, which it isn't getting much use. Now we are expecting an all-new journaling app. This app will reportedly integrate with Apple's Find My app to create a smart journaling app that integrates a number of different location-based features. Supposedly, it will have some mood tracking components. It will integrate into your health and fitness data. It's hard to predict how good the automatic stuff will be here, because obviously if you are writing journals, you're writing deeply personal stuff that especially a phone like the iPhone, which prides itself on higher user privacy, simply shouldn't know of you. Like, it wasn't recording all your conversations in the background and then using AI to break down what you were saying. And when it comes to mood tracking stuff, I kind of doubt that Apple would be like, oh, we think you were in a great mood today, which is kind of a very obnoxious observation for a phone to make when it really has no real way of knowing. So I think it will be a combination of like, okay, health, fitness, location data, and then maybe below each point you can add your own impressions of what happened. So this would be like my speculation, and then there would be like an overall big focus on mental health through mood tracking, maybe having like some questionnaires integrated into it to find out stuff like depression and similar problems. It's really hard to predict what exactly it will look like. This is why I thought it was weird. Like, there was like this, was it one journal or something? The developer was like, oh, Apple is Sherlocking our app. And I'm like, dude, you haven't seen anything. Do you know that this will be a copy of your app? So this is a rumor that I really like. I'm pretty sure it's coming. Like, we have heard it multiple times, but I still cannot really imagine what exactly it will look like. This one is relatively new, a new smart display mode, specifically for the iPhone 14 Pro with its always-on display. It will have a new horizontal interface for the always-on lock screen, and that will show things like calendar appointments, weather forecasts, and notifications. My question to that would primarily be, will this activate more sort of like that little alarm clock interface on the Apple Watch when you put it on the side on the charger? Will this be basically the only activated when the iPhone is charging? Because that, to me, what a smart display mostly is. It is a device that is constantly charging, so it can show quite a lot of data because battery life is no issue. And I imagine, what would exactly be the purpose of using your phone like that during your everyday life? To me, this seems like a feature where maybe on a wireless charger, or maybe like some cool dock that you have, you put your phone at night, and basically then it turns into a smart display, and you can click away some things. Maybe you don't need to log in again for everything, especially if it has some kind of location component. So it basically says, okay, it was always connected to the charger, it wasn't moved in any way, therefore it can afford to show you more stuff without compromising privacy. You have to imagine this is part of all the AI criticism against Apple, right? Where it's like, oh, Apple doesn't do AI. Apple does a ton of AI, from everything like smart HDR in photo capture to the text copy paste function from existing photos to even photo analysis directly on device. What Apple doesn't do is, because simply Apple doesn't have a search engine, so Apple doesn't really have much use for a chatbot, especially not if that would mean Apple has to now invest tens of billions of dollars into a search engine to then push like an AI companion, basically. Like, yes, of course, Siri should get smarter, and I would prefer for Apple to even have their own search engine. But that's simply not financially feasible, and technologically, with Apple's higher regard for privacy, they simply won't have the data like Microsoft and Google. So I think that even like a smart display that integrates into your phone would still also be built on fundamental principles of simplicity and privacy that Apple is known for. So this is kind of how I imagine it looking like. I still don't think that, remember on like the original iPad, when we had like, I believe it was like iOS 4.3 or something, where you had that or I think it was even before that, where you had basically that photo album feature where you could just put the iPad down and it would display all your photos in a beautiful way. And that was only for photos, and that was also before even Apple's higher push for privacy and security. So I imagine that a feature that also shows you notifications and calendar appointments would be even more involved. However, obviously, I cannot be 100% sure, but that's just my take on it. Next, in general, are new health app features. That is pretty logical to me. Apple adds like new health app features basically every year, and in line with the new journaling app, it says to have mood and emotion tracking features. So you can log basically your mood impressions on a daily basis and answer specific questions about each day and track those results. There will be apparently new features for managing vision conditions, such as the ability to store contact and glasses prescription information. And that to me is actually funny, because this is why I always try to look at Apple in a more holistic way. Unlike Google, which puts out like dozens of new projects each year only to kill several dozen of them this very same year or maybe the year after, Apple's features usually, even if you don't directly see the connection right away, there is a connection and there is a thought here. For example, the ability to have contact and glasses prescription information in the health app. Sounds a little random, but still nice to have, right? But when you think that Apple is launching PSVR 2 and likely will be relying on you having the right contacts for them, right? If you need glasses, you would obviously want to have like proper contacts and like all the visual setup. I'm still not quite sure how it will exactly work in the Apple Watch, whether in the VR headset, whether or not you would be able to basically put in the right lenses for your eyes, because that would be quite involved, but that would be awesome. And we have had some rumors pointing in that direction. I'm just not sure if that is going to work like directly from Apple, or if you would have to get those lenses done somewhere else. So it would obviously be cool if you could like order them right from Apple the way you need to. Next is site loading and third-party app stores. This is actually something that I don't quite consider like features. It's more of a philosophical change that has a lot to do with regulatory pressure in the European Union, as 95Mac puts it. Basically, iOS and iPadOS and watchOS and tvOS have been limited to apps you download from Apple's App Store. To a degree, there are some web app functionality on iOS and iPadOS, but those are rather limited and they will never reach quite the same performance and efficiency levels as a native application. And the reason why the App Store matters is because not only is it a trusted source for software, it's also a source of revenue and a lot of profit for Apple, because for each app sold, Apple either collects a 30 or a 15% commission depending on the financial size of the developer behind the app. And there's also like some exceptions for subscriptions. For example, like if a subscription runs for longer than a year, then the commission is reduced from 30% to 15%. And all those numbers are very much in line with everything else in the industry. Google Play Store has basically identical commission numbers, but a few more exceptions. Steam collects 30% and then 20% once you reach a certain threshold of revenue, basically prioritizing bigger developers, while Apple does it in reverse by offering smaller developers the option to subscribe to a 15% commission. So it's all, there's like positives and negatives on each take, and a lot of regulators and like tech enthusiasts in general over the years have said that iOS, iPadOS are too large, they need to be regulated, and they need to work more like a traditional PC, including like the Mac, where you can simply download an app from the web and install it. I am pretty torn on this, I have to say, as somebody who has a MacBook and an iPad. I vastly prefer like just the amount of app support that the iPad has gotten, because developers weren't able to push for for everything to work through the browser. I think that managing my all my subscriptions through one source, even if it might end up costing me more, is very, very convenient, and I am willing to pay a little more for that. And some people have said that nothing changes because you get an extra option. And to a degree, I agree, because I think that the App Store is now so large, so convenient, and people are so used to it that there won't be a massive shift right away from it. However, you have to imagine that they are basically what I call system-relevant apps, sort of like a gigantic bank that the government cannot afford to go bankrupt. There are apps that people will install on their devices regardless how they have to do it. WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft Office if they need it for work, Zoom, everything like that. And even like smaller games, smaller in scope I mean than like AAA games, but like games that people absolutely love and cherish on their phones, even bullshit like Candy Crush. I would argue that people could be persuaded to go outside the App Store to download it from the web, and that to me isn't problematic by itself, but it can start a cascade reaction where if Microsoft is making people download stuff from the web, why not the smaller app? And once users are more accustomed to having stuff downloaded from the web, what isn't to say that they wouldn't start downloading pirated content? Because yes, I know that Apple would likely have some instruments against that. There are ways to check if like there's the proper license for something, and there's a list of like malware sites and sources that downloads are checked against. But none of it is perfect, and everything like that is, you can subvert it. it, right? And I get a little flummoxed because of it, because it's not like I'm against options, but I'm saying that having extra options can sometimes kill the core idea of what the non-option original experience was based on. And in an industry where Android exists and has the vast majority of the worldwide market share, it always seemed weird to me that one would want to force Apple to adopt a similar business model because pro-consumerism, right? Pro-consumerism is this very phrase that really sometimes gets misconstrued, because some people are saying, okay, you are getting the option for site loading, and I'm fine with that. As anybody who knows me, I would probably download me some emulators. But there's also the question, do I still get the option, the choice to get myself a piece of a device, an experience that is more curated, that is more locked down, because that is what the original vision was asking for? I would much rather see an obligatory change to the commission that is collected from apps, like mandating that all app store commissions are now down from 30% to 20 or even 15. Or that maybe there is now an independent council that will decide that some refusals by Apple to put some apps on the store are basically not allowed. So maybe if like the Delta emulator, for example, which is something I really want on my devices without hassle, that this should be allowed on the store, because technically it doesn't come with any ROMs by itself. It hasn't copied any code directly from Nintendo, at least I hope not. So therefore, it should be allowed, even though it offers functionality that, yes, is primarily targeted towards people that will do a lot of piracy. There is no in-between here, right? It's clearly what some of those extra apps and just site loading in general is intended for. But obviously there are now some regulations saying that like apps even from the App Store should offer you the option to like basically click on a link and then pay through the web, or pay through a payment method that isn't natively supported by the App Store. So in the end, you still go outside the App Store payments, but you have an app on the App Store. And that to me also kind of sounds unfair, because now Apple is hosting the app, potentially advertising the app, right? Checking it for malware. Like, I know I'm not saying Apple deserves to collect all the money from all the apps ever made, but do I, as a consumer, deserve to choose a platform that was built on such a principle? Maybe, right? I'm all for the greater good, but I personally love the iOS experience. I love the iPadOS experience. I often prefer my iPad over my way more powerful MacBook, because it has so many apps, because everything is so well integrated. I don't know. I know that this will not be a popular take from me when I say that personally I would like some regulatory changes, but not the regulatory changes that we have seen. As I have said, I would much more prefer if developers were entitled to a larger portion of the revenue right from the get-go. Right? So there's no hassling about like, oh, I have 15% and you have 30%. No. Everybody has 15 or 20%. More apps are allowed on the store. And basically, Apple is a more independent thing here, like where developers can basically, as long as the app is functional, doesn't have malware, and is sort of legal to the most degree, right? Then Apple doesn't have a right to basically not allow it. My speech is getting unnecessarily complicated. The point I'm trying to make is site loading and third-party app store for one day will only come in the EU once they start coming out. And I don't know how long it will take either for the US to adopt similar laws or for there to be enough consumer feedback so Apple starts offering such features in other regions. But I am interested in it, right? And as somebody who lives in the EU, I will definitely try it and check how it exactly it works and what happens if you like change the region. So this will be something interesting to check, regardless of if I actually like the core change. Next, that was the most thing about iOS 17. Next is upgrades to the Wallet app. Apple is supposedly preparing significant changes. Some design changes apparently, so it's easier to sort between like your credit cards and like your membership cards. Kind of is needed because there is now a lot in the Wallet app, right? Between all now potentially car keys and stuff like that. It definitely needs a little bit of a redesign. Next is some changes to AirPlay and SharePlay. How exactly it changes remains to be seen. Supposedly, AirPlay will be easier to connect to a device that it doesn't like have your account on it. But to be honest, I never thought it was very difficult, at least if you're on the same Wi-Fi network. But maybe it will be like easier in hotels to connect to it, regardless if you are logged into Wi-Fi or not. Maybe there will be some easier peer-to-peer functionality. Who knows? So again, we haven't seen actually a lot of leaks, right? Part of it is we're also supposed to be seeing like some changes across like control center redesign. I don't actually know why it's not here. It should be, but then again, we also haven't had any quite details about it, what exactly will change with the design and stuff like that. So I will be basically curious what exactly changes and if I find it intuitive or not. Next, iPadOS. This is actually interesting because we haven't had much iPad-specific rumors in that regard. iPadOS supposedly will now include the Health app, which is great. Still like no Apple Watch app or anything like it, so there still will be a discrepancy between what apps are on iPhone and what apps are on iPad. And then it will gain the lock screen customization options that the iPhone has had since iOS 16. And that to me is always good. I know a lot of people complain why like one device gets like some features later than the other. To me, it's always clear that the iPhone, just simply because of the breadth of sales that it enjoys and the support from the community, or basically the demand from the community, that iPadOS gets those features second, macOS maybe even after iPad, but usually sometime alongside iPadOS. However, there is an other side to iPadOS 17, and that is that we just got Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro on the iPad Pro. In fact, not just the iPad Pro, because Final Cut works on everything that has the M1, which includes the iPad Air, and Logic Pro actually works on every iPad that has an A12 chip or newer. And those apps have been well received, I want to say, not very well received, because they don't have all the functionality, especially Final Cut, of the Mac app. But they do have a different business model. Those are now subscriptions, so that also has to be considered. However, it remains to be seen, like maybe by September or October, once iPadOS actually launches, we will get more changes to those apps. And maybe iPadOS has some tricks up its sleeve when it comes to file management and audio input management, which was supposed to be a feature, right? Which it was supposed to be said that iPadOS could handle like multiple audio playback simultaneously, like the Mac does. Maybe it would even get some like control center elements for managing audio input-output sources. However, that wasn't very detailed, so I'm definitely not promising anything here. However, a lot of people have said like, oh, just because Final Cut and Logic have come out doesn't mean that nothing that much else has to change. However, I would like to remind people of when like the Magic Trackpad came out and all the other functionality that was then built upon it in subsequent releases. So Apple is sometimes known to launch something before WWDC and then expand upon it in during WWDC and beyond. So I am actually excited, and partially because I was never one of the guys who was saying that iPads need to mimic Macs 100%. I have a Mac and an iPad, and I don't have both because I was forced to buy them. For my work, the iPad would actually be 99% more than enough, and for everything else, I still have my work computer. So I wasn't forced to buy a Mac because it has OBS. Yes, I know that the iPad wouldn't be able to do OBS. But then again, I also have an M1 Max MacBook Pro that has significantly better hardware than the iPad. So it actually doesn't just do something different than the iPad. It also does it with a lot more resources than the iPad would be able to incorporate until at least like 2nm chips, because simply the power requirements of an M1 Max would be still too big. So yeah, again, I'm always trying to go back to some philosophical backbones of why I like Apple. Not as much Apple directly. I am not a fan of companies in that regard, but why I like specific things that Apple does, even if they sometimes, yes, go against the concept of pro-consumerism, right? Restricting features to one device and not another, creating very different designs that are only accessible to one platform but not the other, limiting platforms so there's only one source to download from. Or even in the beginning of iOS, for example, Apple asked for every web browser that comes out on the App Store to use WebKit as an engine. And a lot of it nowadays seems archaic and seems unnecessary, but people shouldn't forget that WebKit was miles ahead of everything else back then. And in some regards, in terms of fluidity and battery life efficiency, it still is. But WebKit was so well made for the iPhone that Apple just made it like easy to integrate into any browser you build through their API functionality. And yeah, and then it somehow became a requirement, and now regulators, and I actually agree with that kind of regulation, are asking that requirement should be lifted, and that, for example, if Google or even Microsoft wants to put out Chromium browsers, or Firefox wants to put out the browser on their own engine, that it should be allowed. And that I actually agree with, because times have changed. There should be more freedom for what takes on the internet every company provides. However, there's also the counter side, because once Microsoft and Google end up putting Chromium-based browsers on iOS and iPadOS, well, suddenly the lead for Chromium will keep growing and the web will become even more Googlified, while WebKit, say what you want about Apple, their browser was always based on standards. There's very little in Safari that was built to be exclusionary. Like Apple was always on the forefront with integrating everything from the latest versions of HTML to even have like I forgot, to have like the audio and video codecs integrated into it that are super standard. Like at that time H.264 was like a big deal when it was introduced. Right, and now the web is changing, different requirements are changing, everything from like WebGL and stuff like that. So I kind of understand why it would be good to get different browsers, but everything has its pros and cons. And I always encourage people to look at things like that, no matter on which platform you're on, right? If you are a diehard Windows user, consider the advantages of Windows over a fully open platform, something like Linux. If you are on Linux, consider its advantages of even slightly like closed down operating systems like Windows, and then more closed down systems like macOS, and completely locked down systems like iPadOS. This is why I prefer like different takes on such things over time as companies change their mind, or if we actually have strong competition that creates different products that do different things. So this is why I don't like, oh, why doesn't the iPad just run macOS, or why doesn't the Mac have a touchscreen? There are good reasons for all of those things. And I have argued sometimes on Apple's behalf, sometimes against what Apple believes in. I have changed my mind on some issues over the time. So this is what I encourage all people to do. And this is kind of what I wanted this video to be, sort of an introduction back to who MarkTech is and what MarkTech believes in, even if this video doesn't get many views, for example. Next, macOS. Similar to iPadOS, there aren't many rumors, and so they basically haven't put in anything. So yeah, will the Mac get like some of the new features like the journaling app and access to new Find My features? Who knows? That being said, new Find My features are now also based on Apple collaborating with Google, so that like, you know how iPhones are able to detect AirTags near you? Well, that doesn't work with other tracking devices, or Google doesn't have a really native way to find AirTags. So that kind of working together would result in those things being fixed. How exactly that works and whether it will include everything like the tile network, I'm not so sure about that, but we have heard some stuff about it from Google. And we will probably hear some stuff about it from Apple, which always has like a privacy, like at least like a 2 to 3 minute like little main points breakdown for what is new in privacy in the latest versions of iOS, iPadOS, macOS, etc. Next is watchOS, and ironically this is the one thing that we have the second most knowledge about after iOS, and probably we have like the biggest percentage knowledge of what is actually changing, because on iOS there are still a lot of things we don't know, like what will Control Center look like different, how does the smart home display functionality work, etc. On watchOS, we actually have a pretty good understanding of what will change. Mark Gurman calls it a fairly extensive upgrade, and that has notable changes to the user interface. There will be a focus on widgets. And that is interesting because it will be similar to widget stacks, which, as you know, is you put several widgets on top of each other on iPhone and iPad. And basically, instead of having one widget stack, like several widget stacks per screen, basically one screen on the Apple Watch would be its own widget stack, and then you swipe through those screens to access them. At least that's how I imagine it. And that will include everything from activity tracking, weather, stocks, calendar, appointments, and more. What's interesting is that this is supposed to be somewhat similar to the Glances interface that was originally introduced on watchOS, and I actually like those very much. However, they were very performance intensive for the original Apple Watch and the Apple Watch Series 2 and stuff like that. So seeing a return to similar functionality, we've actually seen a little bit of that with the Siri watch face, which has a lot of functionality that you can scroll through with the digital crown, with like some mini widgets basically integrated into it. I think that sounds like a logical evolution, taking some older ideas, some newer ideas, combining it with like the development platform for widgets on iOS and iPadOS, and suddenly you have once again a very cohesive environment, very similar development tools, very easy to scale from one platform to the next. Again, there is a core philosophy between changes, and yes, sometimes you would wish that some features would come out earlier. Sometimes you aren't happy with the exact implementation of a feature, but I promise you there's a lot more thought put behind what Apple is doing with watchOS 10 than Google has put into, like, I don't even remember what like their watch operating system is now called. Like, is it Android Wear? Is it Wear? I think it's now Wear OS, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And there's a lot of randomness, right? Like copying some stuff from, what was it called? Gear OS, like from the Galaxy Gear watches, and then working together with Samsung for some stuff. And now they have their own Pixel Watch, which has a lot of very, very Apple Watch-like user interface elements. But it's still not quite as thought through as what's on the Apple Watch, and I don't think that anybody could legitimately argue against it. I understand having a preference between Android and iOS, and having a preference between Windows and Mac OS, but like I don't think there's anything that comes close to just how well curated watchOS is, and I'm very much looking forward to getting this new functionality that is built on some older functionality but in a very new package. According to Bloomberg, Apple Watch users will be able to scroll through those widgets, okay? Apple's focus on widget might go as far as to include new functionality for the digital crown. In the current version of watchOS, pressing the digital crown takes you to the Apple Watch home screen. In watchOS 10, however, Apple is testing having the digital crown open up the new widgets interface instead. Interesting. Maybe they would change the functionality between like a single press of the digital crown and like a double press. The double press currently puts you back into your recently opened stuff, basically like the iPhone multitasking interface. And maybe they would now have one press for the widget interface, because the widget interface sort of works like recently opened apps. It has all the functionality likely that you would want from recently accessed apps. And maybe then a double press gets you back to the home screen, and or maybe it even like combines two of those UI elements. Again, it's hard to completely predict because Apple does a lot of like long-term testing on their own developers, and then like basically like psychiatrists to like check out, oh, this button press makes me feel this way and stuff like that. So I obviously, because I don't have the data, that testing knowledge, I cannot predict how exactly it would look like. However, I'm happy to leave feedback, because over the years there were some things that I was very happy with on Apple Watch and some others that I wasn't. So it used to be very hit and miss. It's now very much mostly hit, but I'm not afraid to call them out if they make something nonsensical like the scribble functionality and like all those contacts on the Apple Watch like that were accessible through the side button. Yeah, that was garbage, but that was in the very early days of Apple Watch. And outside of widget, watchOS 10 will likely incorporate many of the new features of iOS 17 as well, such as smooth and motion tracking. Interestingly, we don't see here, or maybe I missed it somewhere, is that it would also supposedly have some kind of new home screen packaging, basically, where currently you either have like this sort of funny mode where you can have like funny shapes in how you arrange your apps together, right? I always forget what it's called. And then the other is the list mode where you can see all your apps, which I actually prefer. I know people like Tylosef Tech likes the original interface, but I like the list view. It's more logical to me. And supposedly Apple Watch would gain things like folders. Maybe it would even get like the app folder stuff from iOS. And that being said, supposedly like those automatic app folders on iOS, you would now be able to rename. So maybe that would now be a consistent thing across all your platforms, across for macOS, which still has like Spotlight. What's it called? Spotlight, or what was it called? Launchpad. I'm sorry. For one, it's very late in the day, and second, a lot of those names were given like in the early days when those features were designed, and then people were actually using those things without much thinking. Oh, I'm now accessing the Launchpad, right? Yeah, so this is why I sometimes don't have the right name right on my tongue. I'm sorry. Okay, so that is watchOS. Next, tvOS, which is interesting because I don't remember a single rumor directly for TV. Okay, there are 0 rumors on what to expect for Apple TV and HomePod users. tvOS will be the latest software for Apple TV users, while HomePod software version 17 will be available for HomePod and HomePod Mini. Well, we actually don't know, right? Will it be finally like the version to cut off the original HomePod that still has like the 8 chip, but then again the S1 chip in the newest Apple Watch, or no, it's not the S1 chip. I'm sorry, it's now which chip is it? The S7, right? I'm trying not to say too many wrong things because I know that I am actually held to somewhat high standards for somebody who has such a small channel. HomePods, I'm really quickly looking this up on my phone. Yeah, the HomePod has the S7 chip. That's great. I think I just said S1 because I was sort of like having it back in my head for what I expect from this. Next is we're getting already to hardware. And let's start with the less exciting piece of hardware, which is the 15-inch MacBook Air. And the 15-inch MacBook Air is interesting because sorry, it doesn't. My mouse is jumping. Oh, okay, good. Okay, now it works. So the 15-inch MacBook Air will basically be just a larger version of the current 13.6-inch MacBook Air, and it supposedly still has an M2 processor. So no M3, no M2 Pro, and certainly no M2 Max or anything like that. How much they would be price difference they are mentioning here that they expect a 15-inch MacBook Air to carry a $500 price increment over the 13-inch model. That to me is complete bullshit. I would not expect there to be a larger than $300 difference if they are spec matched, though, because there is a chance that maybe the 15-inch version comes right off the gate with 512 gigabytes, which, if you know how Apple prices storage, that's $200 extra for storage and then $300 extra for the larger device. However, for the same specs, I would not expect a $500 price difference, and that also comes down to even the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro models, because their actual price difference is around $200. They actually have a different starting point for specs, because the 16-inch comes with the fully enabled Pro chip and not the binned one. So this is a little bit misleading here. Yeah, okay. Sorry. My mouse is like jumping to the edge. I don't know why. Maybe it thinks it's iPadOS and is trying to take a screenshot. Okay, and now we get to the meat and the potatoes and the sour cream and everything else. And I will not try to dwell on it too much because I've done quite a few videos breaking it down over the time. Apple Reality Pro, or Apple's virtual reality headset. It's a very, very interesting thing for Apple to get into, because Apple is like known for those super thin, super light devices, very easy to use, very easy to either put on your wrist or in your pocket. And Apple Reality Pro and the operating system it's running, supposedly XR OS, it will not be quite like that. It will be more similar to something like the PlayStation VR headset or the Oculus headsets, in the sense that it's a headset. It's not an Apple Glasses kind of thing, like what Google tried to do with Google Glasses and then spectacularly failed. We actually got recently like a bill of material, like not a direct breakdown, but like saying it's somewhere between like $1,300 to $1,600 to build it. Maybe really closer to that $1,600 once you include like shipping and stuff like that. And 9to5Mac says it will cost around $3,000. However, the same rumors that were mentioning that bill of material cost also said that Apple originally planned to sell it at a slight loss. I don't believe that was ever like realistic, except for maybe Apple really wanted to get it to developers during the first generation. However, now apparently Apple decided to basically sell it at cost. That's why I don't see it costing $3,000. I can see it costing $2,000, right? Imagining it costing it to build like $1,500. So account for some of the research and development costs that obviously went into it. And then maybe account for, who knows, maybe there will be like different storage configurations, stuff like that will get closer to 3,000. We have had some rumors that it would apparently come with like 12 gigs of RAM and an M2 chip and like 256 gigabytes of storage. I don't know. I don't think we have ever seen like super detailed, like super, I'm totally sure of those rumors. What we have seen is what's is being said, for example. But man, 9to5Mac has made actually quite a lot of mistakes here. For one, they're saying it has two 4K micro LED panels. That's not true. It has micro OLED panels. Those are the latest from Sony. They are quite advanced, but they are not the same technology as micro LED. Don't ask me how exactly they're different. Primarily micro LED is like more directly, basically, so there are less layers, while micro LED is just the next version of what LCD and OLED lead up to. Micro LED will find its way to Apple Watches and iPhones, but the micro in micro OLED means something different than micro in micro LED. That's basically the take of my very, very tired brain on this. And apparently Apple is also working on a more affordable headset that will go into mass production sometime at least 2025. Like it will not be expected until then. I assume though that it would probably be realistic to see like late 2025 to maybe then get like two versions where we would get like Apple Reality Pro 2nd generation and just Apple Reality, and then maybe Apple Reality is $1,000 and Apple Reality Pro starts at $2,000, but there's also like a big storage discrepancy between those. It's difficult to really say because we are debating the pricing and like the market power of a device that we haven't realistically seen. And for example, one advantage in terms of pricing that Apple Reality has over its competitors is that it doesn't have controllers. It will be it will work through your eyes and through your hand motions. And then it doesn't have an integrated battery probably at all, but most like we haven't heard exactly what's about like internal battery. Apparently it won't have any to make it as lightweight as possible, or maybe it would have a super duper small one. However, it will be powered realistically then through a battery pack, something that supposedly looks similar to the iPhone battery pack. But we simply don't know, right? And it would apparently connect like to like the battery pack would be like on a belt or something, and you would have a proprietary connector that like I suppose magnetically attaches to that battery. Again, we haven't seen it, so I really want to reserve my reaction to this once I'm actually reacting to this, right? It's very different from just saying, oh, I hate the idea of having an external battery pack. However, I am somebody who uses a PSVR 2, and that one uses a cable that connects to my PlayStation, and I have to make sure that I don't trip over the cable. So with the Apple headset, I would have a small cable that goes down to basically my belt, and there would be zero opportunity for me to trip over it, or even like unless like if it's close to the body, then I also wouldn't even like rip it out accidentally. So that definitely would be a plus for me. And anybody who's like saying, oh, but like the Quest has like its own integrated battery, the Quest also has a far worse processor, doesn't actually have that great battery life, and it still mostly runs on controllers. And I say mostly because yes, there is some way to maybe like hack it basically and use some hand gestures, but the Apple Reality Pro is something that would be basically not, it would be much more feasible for like outdoor activities. I still have no idea if Apple actually wants to convince you to wear them as glasses in any way, because I also don't know how large exactly they are. Would they maybe expect you to walk around them through the house? I don't actually know, and there's a big focus on AR, which is augmented reality or extended reality, so there will also be a lot of social features like FaceTime, content consumption, like virtual worlds and rooms. This is now me basically reading out what they're saying, but supposedly like FaceTime would have like Memoji-like avatars, and so it's hard for me to predict how Reality Pro actually is supposedly integrated into our daily lives. To my prediction, currently it would still mostly be like a headset for the home, for like some productivity, for some gaming, for some content consumption, but it would not be something that you actively take outside, at least not a lot, and you certainly don't walk around it on the streets. we haven't heard much of like, will Apple Maps be integrated into it? Because we have like AR prediction, AR guidance basically on the map. Or you can take your iPhone, scan the environment around you, and then it will say you turn right, turn left, basically on what is shown on the iPhone. And on the iPhone, that's actually not very much needed, because you would much more like to hear it turn left or turn right based on your geolocation, and you wouldn't want to walk around with your iPhone in front of your eyes. But what if you could walk around in glasses or a headset? Like, and it depends, like, how thick is the headset, how heavy is the headset, how stupid do you look in the headset. So yeah, I'm trying to stay neutral here, because I like to always point out Apple's like design philosophies. However, I'm not above or below, however you want to put it, saying that sometimes their visions go wrong or they don't even respect their own visions. I would say that TV has been something that they now get right, now that they have a very fast processor in it. They have a remote that is actually very well built, but for quite a couple of years there was like, oh, try a little bit of gaming, and there's still some part to it, but at least there's now a decent processor inside. You weren't gonna game on a TV much with an A8 chip, and certainly not with like 1 gig of RAM or something like that. The HomePod, the original HomePod, was a great idea, but then they discounted it because apparently it didn't make sense for them, even though a lot of people really liked it. But then they made a HomePod Mini, and then they resurrected the original HomePod with features that are arguably a little worse. Like the S7 chip from the Apple Watch likely isn't even quite as fast as the A8 inside it, and it has like worse Wi-Fi. Again, I have a whole video covering why the HomePod is weird, but Apple has weird products in their lineup where you don't quite know what they were trying to accomplish or how much they expect to sell given a high price point. And I think that for the first generation at least, Apple Reality Pro will very much land in that category, and then in 2025 we will see just how much they can lower pricing while still offering a premium experience, whether or not we will actually see something like an Apple Glasses. So I am really excited to see this. I hope to try it out at an Apple store, maybe if it launches at the end of the year. But I most likely won't be buying the first generation for myself. Especially not if it's above $2,000. It's less a problem with money. Again, I'm known to spend quite a lot on Apple hardware and software. But yeah, out of principle, I wouldn't be paying more than $2,000 for a headset, and most likely not even over $1,500, especially not with me having PSVR 2 and rarely even finding time to play that. So yes, this is basically now me wrapping up, because 9 to 5 Mac is wrapping up. And again, this was a somewhat hastily put together article from them. There's some stuff missing. There are some smaller mistakes. So hopefully if you listen to me, you could get my side of and take on this. And I've mentioned that in my last 2 streams, but my last stream is now closed because of Apple, and the stream before that is deleted. So to anybody who doesn't know, I left Twitter because I cannot be on a platform that is run by Elon Musk, and I have wanted to maybe even change my mind, but then I saw like the disastrous like campaign launch he did with Ron DeSantis, and that killed all my hype. It's not like I had hype for Twitter. It killed all my trepidatious optimism for returning to Twitter and maybe making it just an Apple focused account. I'm still working on that, maybe to some degree, to have an account that is not very political and doesn't have a lot of tweets and stuff, but basically exists to communicate with a few Twitter friends and basically leave links to my latest streams and videos. But I will decide that once WWDC rolls around and I decide what type of content I want to make in covering all of the things that will come after that. Now I am on Mastodon also, and that account basically exists to comment on Apple related topics. I will leave my Mastodon account link on the channel once I go through all my channel settings in the next few days, and I will also leave my YouTube link on my Mastodon account. So yeah, that was basically it. I know it was a long video, much longer than I expected it to be. I'll try to check how long it actually is now. Oh my god, it's well over an hour. No wonder I can barely breathe anymore. But it was a lot of fun, and I really wanted to put something on the channel that isn't deleted or like copyright blocked. And I was really happy to talk about WWDC, and I have a lot up on my sleeve, a lot to do basically before WWDC, but after WWDC I'm actually quite free for a while. So expect a lot of content. Feel free to let me know if you still want to see more live streams or maybe some video on demand stuff instead, basically pre-recorded stuff. Whether you would like to see my face or not, whether you would like to see me as an emoji instead of a full face. So yeah. Believe me, you wouldn't want to see my face now after a Beat Saber. So I'm very grateful to anybody who's joined the channel in the last month. I'm very grateful to all of you who put us over 1,000 views for my HomePod video, over 2.3 thousand for the for the Samsung Galaxy S23 reaction video, over several hundred views for a lot of other videos on the channel. So yeah, it's actually way better than I thought it would be, especially with a 3-month hiatus. I thought the Google algorithm would completely forget me. And I hope anybody who joined us either live right now or plans to watch this afterwards or is rewatching older videos or just watching them, experience them for the first time. I'm grateful to all of you, and I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and tune in next time, because this is Mark Tech tuning out, and hope to see you guys next time.